The Journey Beneath the System by Swapnil Saurav.
5. Uneasiness Around. Feyyaz strolled into the alley, whistling a popular song he'd heard recently. Unbeknownst to him, one of the men began following him between the buildings. "I'm starving. I saw Charvi put something in the fridge. Whatever it is, that'll do," he thought. At some point, he noticed he was not alone. He decided to speed up his pace a bit. The man didn't appear to be looking at him, but he was walking faster. Wasn't he? "I'm imagining things," he told himself. He looked behind one more time. The man was getting closer. Nervous about the conversation they had had that morning, he began running. The street ahead looked very close now. Just a little more. He turned his head. The man was pointing in his direction. Huh? What's he trying to? Wham! There was a loud crash as Feyyaz ran headlong into the other man, who had turned into the alley from the other side just before he reached the end of it. The sound came from an ornamental vase the man was holding, which fell and broke into a dozen pieces. "What have you done?" the man yelled angrily. Feyyaz crawled backwards in confusion, trying to avoid the broken pieces and the man's wrath. "I'm sorry," he cried out. "I was just..." "You..." The man interrupted him, pointing at his face with a threatening finger. "Do you have any idea of what you've just destroyed?" The anguished Feyyaz looked around for the man he thought had been following him. During those brief seconds, he had already caught up to them. "I tried to warn him, but for some reason he kept running like a wild animal," that second man said. "And why exactly would someone run on the street without looking where they are going? Are you blind or just stupid?" the man shouted, looking more and more enraged each second. I, Feyyaz tried to say, but the furious man didn't let him justify himself. "How am I going to explain this to my boss? This is all your fault. You're going to pay for this." And with that, he put a hand on his back, as if he were about to pull a weapon from behind. Feyyaz covered his face with his arms and yelled, "Wait!" To his surprise, the other man stood between him and his aggressor. "Hold on," he said. "There's no need to solve things like this. I'm sure there's another way." "Yes," Feyyaz quickly agreed, still covering his face. "I can make up for it. Please." The two older men smiled at each other. "How? That vase had an incredible collector's value, and you don't look like you have enough money to pay what it's worth," the first man said in a disrespectful tone. "Perhaps he could work to pay it back," the other one suggested. "Work?" Feyyaz asked. He slowly lowered his arms and looked at the first man, who still looked angry but seemed to be evaluating him. He remembered Charvi's words from that morning, things like cars exploding, or people disappearing. All he could think of at the moment was not disappearing like the people in the news. "Work, of course. I can work," he said, standing up and trying to sound convincing. "Well," the man said. He put his hand behind his back one more time. Feyyaz gulped. But what he took out was not a weapon, but a small phone. "I'll give you one opportunity. You'll take this phone." He threw the phone to Feyyaz, who almost dropped it to the ground while trying to catch it. "You'll take calls and perform the jobs you're instructed until you've compensated for the vase's value. Do you understand?" Feyyaz stared at the phone in his hands. He didn't like where the situation was going, but the man looked dangerous, and he seemed serious. "Do you understand?" the man repeated, glaring at Feyyaz. He nodded, too scared to speak. "I'll be watching you very closely. My boss does not play games, and he'll be less than pleased to hear what happened to his precious vase, so you'd better do your job well. And if you fail," the man said in a frightening tone. Feyyaz shook his head. "You'll have to deal with him." Several days later, the four friends were at home having lunch. This time, it was Arav who had done the cooking. I think it has been a while since we last had lunch together, Charvi pointed out. Yeah, Bhavin replied. We've all been so busy. How's the search going, Charvi? Feyyaz asked. Charvi looked down. Not well, she replied. Everyone I've talked to in the last days has made up all sorts of excuses to reject me. I'm starting to think I'm not cut out for this. Don't give up, Arav encouraged her. That's right. You're the one who told us that we have to be brave to follow our dreams. Bhavin asserted. Charvi forced a weak smile. True. I did say that. They ate in silence for a minute. What about you, Bhavin? Arav inquired. You look tired. Really? Bhavin asked, pretending not to know what Arav was talking about. It must be the training. I've been training a lot, you know. Training, he said and laughed unconvincingly. Arav stared at him. Before he could ask anything else, Bhavin pointed at Feyyaz. He's the one you should be asking. Feyyaz nearly jumped from his seat. What? I'm perfectly fine, he replied. No, you're not, intervened Charvi. You've been acting weird lately, and you haven't told us anything about that new job you got. Everyone turned their attention toward Feyyaz, who shifted uncomfortably in his seat. In that precise moment, the little phone rang. Feyyaz shushed his friends and picked it up. Yes. Yes. I'll be right there. He stood up and grabbed his bag in a hurry. I have to go, guys. I'll tell you about it later, he said, and rushed outside. Oh. Well. What were we talking about? Charvi said, looking at Bhavin. He stood up as quickly as his friend. The food was delicious, Arav. You've got to teach us sometime, he said. He took his dish to the kitchen and grabbed his things too. I'd better get going too. See you. And he left. I'm worried about them, Charvi expressed, biting her lip. Me too, Arav concurred. Oh, at least one of us is doing well. Are you dating that girl now, Arav? Charvi asked him. Arav chuckled. Not really. But you like her, don't you? She insisted. Perhaps, he replied. Charvi laughed. That's not a valid answer. You like her, she affirmed. And you have that sponsorship together now too, right? Did you obtain it? What is it like? Arav's smile faded slightly. Let's not talk about it right now. I should leave as well, he replied. Charvi stared at him as he stood up and cleaned up the table. I'm sorry, but would you mind doing the dishes? He asked while looking for his guitar case. No, it's all right. I'll take care of them, Charvi answered. Arav smiled at her warmly. Thank you. See you for dinner, okay? Okay, she replied, a little disappointed. And hey, he said before going out, making her lift her face. Don't lose faith in yourself. You'll find something for sure. We're all rooting for you. Charvi was left alone in the flat, thinking about the conversation. What's wrong with everyone today? She wondered. She didn't stand up immediately. Instead, she remained at the table for several minutes, pondering. They're all busy with their activities, and they have all been stressed lately. And, to top it all off, they are worried about me. I have to be strong. I have to be strong for myself and them, she affirmed. But what am I going to do? She went to her bedroom and sat on the bed, next to her handbag. She looked at it and huffed. I can't believe I'm seriously thinking about this, she said. She searched her bag, took out her wallet and opened it. There was the card she had received over a week ago. She slowly took it out and studied it one more time. There's just this number, she murmured. Should I call and ask? I guess that won't hurt. Charvi sighed. On the 34th floor of one of the tallest buildings in the center of Shyamavali, a workshop was being held in a large conference room. The room doors opened as soon as it ended, and dozens of lively people walked out of it conversing with one another. The place was teeming with elegantly dressed music artists, producers and managers. That was extraordinary. Ria squealed, holding Arav's arm as they exited the room. Do you know who we just trained with? He's one of the biggest songwriters in this state. He's worked with several rising singers and bands, some of which are currently on the radio. It's such an honor to meet him live. How did they manage to invite him here? They must have so much influence. She rambled in excitement. Arav watched the girl go on and on with her description of the character and his career history. Her overwhelming enthusiasm made her look rather cute. He smiled. Yes, it was clear that he knew what he was talking about. Even without knowing him, I could tell he has a lot of experience, he acknowledged. Ria grinned. Right? Not many people get to participate in a workshop with such a genius. Can you imagine how expensive these events must be? Oh, I'm so glad we got the sponsorship. Arav nodded, but then his face became stern. Yes. But you do realize this is not for free either, don't you? They've got us working for them. We've already performed 3 different, totally unrelated tasks this week. Ria blinked. Well, thinking of it, I suppose we are. But that's not something bad, is it? They're helping us with our career. It's only fair that we help them back, right? Right? She argued, slightly anxious towards the end. Ria stared at Arav, awaiting his approval of her reasoning. His seriousness made her nervous. Arav noticed it and relaxed his expression. I'm not saying it's bad. What I'm saying is... She didn't let him finish. Excellent. Next week we have an invitation for a special crowdfunding event at the town hall. They said if we rehearse, they might even let us play a song for the guests. Arav decided it was best to keep his thought to himself. After all, there was nothing to gain from ruining her mood. He had to admit it. He had grown fond of Ria in the brief time they had known each other, and he enjoyed seeing her happy. But he couldn't help thinking that, as he had initially suspected, the scholarship money and special benefits they were receiving came in exchange for work that wasn't expressly determined, specified or explained to them. And that work had a mysterious aura around it, not in a good way. Near the place where that strange man had contacted Charvi to offer her his organization's services, the young woman stood on the pavement, looking at both sides of the street. She checked the time on her phone. It was 4:29 p.m. They said to be here at 4:30. She murmured. An executive car pulled over in front of her. Good afternoon, Miss Charvi. Charvi recognized the voice and, as the back door opened, she saw the short, fat man waving at her from inside. Please come in, he said. She looked at the inside of the car. It was almost like a limousine. I thought it would be better to pick you up since the main office is difficult to access using public transport. Is this appropriate for you? He asked in a dubitative tone. Charvi looked him in the eye. Only if you tell me your name now, she replied. The man lifted his eyebrows. Ah. Well, if it's so important to you. I'm Mithul, he said, looking slightly embarrassed. He seemed sincere and good-hearted. Nice to meet you, Mithul. She answered with a smile and took a seat next to him. The car started moving across the city. The one who took my call gave me a lot of organization. It sounds quite information about your well-established and acceptable. If you had been clearer the other day, I'd have probably taken the offer, Charvi told Mithul. I'd like to thank you for coming, he said. I'm not very good at this. He looked out the window, avoiding Charvi's stare. She had the impression he didn't really like his job. After a while, the car finally stopped in front of a huge building. Mithul looked nervous. "Ah, I should open the door for you," he started. "Don't worry about it," Charvi replied, opening the door herself and leaving the car. They entered the building and headed straight to the lift. Mithul used a special key and pressed the last floor button. Going up, Charvi noticed his knees were trembling. "You're about to meet my boss. Please be very, very respectful." The lift doors opened to a majestic office. Across the fancy desk sat a man wearing elegant clothes and a fedora hat. Despite the distance, she immediately noticed his eyes had two different colors. One of them was brown, the other one light gray. The colorful-eyed man gave her a gentle smile. "It's a pleasure to meet you, miss. What can I help you with?"